African cities are facing challenges with water supplies, aging infrastructure and supply disruptions, which have all affected communities nationwide. Here to help us unpack further, we're joined by Professor Mike Muller, former Water Affairs Department Director General. Prof, once again, good to have you and thank you very much for coming on. We normally would be focusing on Gauteng and the many water challenges that we were talking about that we're facing Gauteng. Previously, it would have been Cape Town, but more and more it's becoming clear that I suppose KwaZulu-Natal and other cities as well are equally as affected. How bad is the situation in KZN?
Well, I mean, we know that Tekwini in particular had a series of problems which were caused in many cases by too much water rather than too little. You know, they had those terrible floods. It wasn't climate change, it was just a big flood, a normal big flood like they have in KZN, but it washed away a lot of pipes and did quite a lot of damage, both to the water supply and to the sewage treatment. And they've still sort of scrambling to catch up. They've had communities there who've been without water for months and months. And that was one reason was they hadn't protected the pipes carefully enough against flooding. And secondly, once you've got that problem, it takes a long time to fix. So the lesson from KZN is don't let your maintenance slip, because it's very easy to lose a pipeline, but it's very much more difficult to build it. Having said that, they also have a problem common to a lot of South African cities. There's a lot of water being used that isn't paid for. There's a lot of water lost through leaks. And the combination of using uncontrolled amounts of water on the one hand and losing a lot of water through leaks means there just isn't enough water in the system sometimes, particularly in hot weather. And then everyone's running short and everyone's calling crisis. But these are things that we have to manage.
The G20 disaster risk reduction teams were meeting in Durban this week, and they are, of course, debating more the global crisis issues. While the residents are in Athlone Park, for example, and is being away, really enduring a full week of no water coming out of the pipes. Do you think these platforms like the G20 maybe are focusing on issues that are not really relevant to the experience and lived lives of communities?
Yeah. Well, you know, we always say in the water business that water is very local. Every place has a different water system. They all have the same kind of climate, but every system is a bit different. And if you want to look at an organization like the G20, which is, a global organization of the 20 biggest countries in the world, what we have to realize is that they can talk much more about the governance and the organization and the finance of a country. And the one thing that we do know from the international comparisons of governance is that if you don't have well-managed cities, you don't have well-managed water, you run into a lot of water problems. And I think that what we're finding in South Africa is that our local government quite often isn't up to the job. And this is where a group like the G20 would probably say, yeah, we can help you with all sorts of things, but until you get your local governance right, you won't be able to fix those local problems.
You're saying that there needs to be a meaningful maintenance regime actually put in place. Now, there seems to be an aversion to shutdowns because of, I suppose, the image of the government. And sometimes these shutdowns are postponed, for example, during election season, during by-elections, because they make whoever is in power at the time look bad. Right now, we are told that, for example, the minister would have intervened in this matter of Umgeni Tukela Water to postpone this planned shutdown, which was aimed at replacing some 1,200 millimeter diameter seals, as well as check meters in the Wiggins water treatment West gravity bulk pipeline. But that, of course, as a sample of what generally happens, that we are averse to having these shutdowns conducted periodically. Like load shedding now. Are we likely going to see a similar situation in the water sector where we are going to be forced now to actually shut these systems down?
Yeah. Look, I mean, let's bring it back to Gauteng. we know, and we've known for 5 or 10 years, that because we've delayed the Lesotho Highlands Water Project Phase 2, there's not going to be a great deal of water available. There certainly won't be any new supplies available to Gauteng, although the population, and sometimes we hope the economic activity, keeps growing. Now, when that sort of thing happens, the best thing you can do is to say to people, look, we've got a restriction on the water supply. We're going to put restrictions on how much you can use. Those restrictions don't mean we're going to cut you off, but it does mean that if you use more than a certain amount, you're going to have to pay more. And those kind of interventions normally happen because of drought. But in Gauteng, we can look forward to 3 years now, till 2029. So it's 4 years before there's new water available. So we're going to have to use what we have quite carefully. And the best way to do that is to tell people, look, you have to reduce your water use. If you don't, we're going to put on a penalty tariff, and let's all make that effort to use less water. And at the same time, everyone will say, and can you please make more effort to fix the leaks? But at the moment, what we've got is a situation where they don't want to intervene. You're quite right, Tabo. They don't want to intervene in the water supply because then they're admitting a bit of a failure. The consequence we're seeing in Johannesburg is that there's a whole lot of areas where the water gets switched off and on, every night or every second night. And what's that's doing is actually damaging the infrastructure because the pressure comes on, it comes off, it comes on, it comes off, and you see more and more leaks happening. So we lose more water. And really, they're trying to avoid having a citywide intervention, save water across the city. Let's have some penalty tariffs for people who use too much. But what we're going to see as a result is the leakages and the losses are going to grow. So, the politicians can't have it both ways. They can't not intervene and then complain when there's a shortage. Really, I think they should intervene sooner rather than later. But, politics is politics, and what people are worried about today, and they hope that people will forget tomorrow. But if there's no water tomorrow, we won't forget. I can promise them that.
We touched on this a little bit the last time, Prof. The audit that needs to happen, particularly when it comes to the assets within the water sector. Now, one of the questions that keeps coming up is whether or not the capacity of our reservoirs is sufficient, particularly considering the population growth and people migrating into various parts of South Africa, and whether or not, again, we need to have that conversation of an asset audit of what we have and what we really need.
Yeah. Dabo, I think we do need an audit of our local government systems, but actually I'm not worried about the pipes and the reservoirs. We actually need to have an audit of the organizations that manage them and see whether they've got the right people in the right places to make the right decisions. Otherwise, what happens is someone will say, oh, we need a big new reservoir. And they'll forget that you need water to fill it up, and we'll have a big empty reservoir. And there are some across the country. So I think that we need to think about what the president and the Minister of Culture and the Minister of Water said a couple of weeks ago at that big water indaba. They said, unless the municipalities put competent managements in place with qualified people who are capable of running the organizations properly, we're going to have to send somebody else to run them. We can't have municipalities in places with 5 million people like the Gauteng metros and eThekwini and Cape Town. We can't have those metros run by people who actually don't have the full capabilities. And if we can't organize it, let's bring in someone who can. And that could be a private sector player, and everyone gets horrified, all privatization. It could be a public sector organization like Umgeni Hlatuzi Water or Rand Water. But let's put organizations in place that are able to run the service and keep it running and tell us when we need to build more and then try and get it built on time, rather than we run out of water, then everyone complains and we all sort of panic over, where we're going to get water from tonight. We do need to fix the organizations. And the promise that came from that water indaba was, if the municipalities don't get their act together, afraid national government is going to have to say, we're sending somebody there who can do the job for you. And I think that's going to be the big battle over the next few months. How do we make sure we get those water organizations in our municipalities properly staffed and properly run, so that at least we know where we stand and we don't wake up every morning, we open a tap, we're not sure if the water's going to come out or not.
Prof, appreciate your time as always. Thanks for coming on. Former Water Affairs Department Director General there, Professor Mike Muller.